Welcome, this is Debra Ann Clement, and thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Shortcut to the Soul. So before I dive into today's topic, I just want to make an announcement, which is I am going to be offering a series of online events. They're going to be live events. They're teaching events, and you'll have the opportunity to show up live. It will be recorded, so if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you can't make it at all, you can always buy the recording. But it'll be a live event so that you will have the opportunity to ask questions. And so for right now, I'm looking at July. You know, when it comes to picking a day and time that's going to satisfy everybody, look, it's just impossible. So with the time zones and all of that, right now I am looking at doing them on a Sunday, maybe around 12 o'clock Eastern time. But what I'm going to say to everyone, if you're interested, by all means, shoot me an email if that doesn't work for you, because depending on the interest, I may do 2 events, different times, or, again, there could possibly, be a change. But to be honest with you, since I'm on the Eastern seaboard, to do something on a weeknight at 9 o'clock at night or start at 8 o'clock at night, it's too late, because it's going to be a 90-minute event. There's going to be a time for Q&A after that. So that's the reason why I'm thinking about Sunday. But by all means, I'm open to feedback. And let's see, there was something else I did. Oh, so if you're interested in it and you want to make sure that you see the announcement for it, will I announce it, during one of these shows? I'm going to say, when I say maybe, maybe, because the truth is, when I have time, I do these shows, and sometimes I might record a few in advance. But really, the first announcements for any kind of event, any type of a special, it goes out to my newsletter subscribers. So if you're interested in learning about any upcoming these classes, I'm just going to say to you, go to my website, debraclementastrologer.com, click on freebies, click on newsletter, sign up. You will get an email from me every other week. And there might be when it comes to announcing the class, it's going to depend. It might be a separate email, or it just might be in one of the emails that come in, that come every other week. So wanted to mention that. Now, today's topic, it's relationship astrology. But we're not just talking romance here. And the truth is, when most people hear relationship astrology, they do tend to think of romantic compatibility. And listen, for good reason, because how many books and articles, right? When these words are out there, relationship astrology, the focus usually is on romance. And, for good reason, because there's a strong interest. But let's face it, relationship astrology, it's all of our relationships, starting with the very first ones, which is our family, and which can also be at times quite challenging, as well as with our friends, our neighbors, our bosses, right? Our adversaries, and of course our professional relationships. So when it comes to analyzing relationships, because you can do it in a number of ways, and I want to talk about, I'm going to call it maybe 3 levels, just for lack of a better phrase at the moment. So when it comes to analyzing relationships, and here I will say, especially those of a romantic nature, the one question, and it still comes up, it used to come up all the time, but it still comes up sometimes, so I do want to address this, just in case anyone still has this question, is, do the same principles for romantic relationships apply to gay relationships, especially when you're talking about Venus and Mars? So I always say they do. I mean, to me, there is no such thing as gay astrology. I think it's a bunch of crap. People are people, planets are planets, love is love, and that's it. The reason for the confusion, I think, is because, look, popular astrology focuses on Venus and Mars as being feminine and masculine, right? Venus/Aphrodite is a woman, Mars/Aries is a man. But the truth is, every single one of us embodies feminine and masculine traits to varying degrees. And a different way to look at it is that Venus represents the receptive principle. Mars represents the active principle. So if you consider it from that viewpoint, I think it's easier to see, right, that we all embody receptive and active, but again, to varying degrees. Now, I think what's most important is that Venus represents love and affection, and Mars represents sex and passion. And, listen, one night stands and bad choices aside, right? Ideally speaking, we have both of them to complete a relationship. So, on a similar note, the moon is said to represent what a man is attracted to in a woman. The sun is what a woman is attracted to in a husband. I think it's a little archaic. To be honest with you, never really saw that play out. Not in my experience, but I will say this. The moon is the nurturing principle. The sun is the authoritative one. At the end of the day, in a relationship, we all need to satisfy our moon, right? We need to feel secure. We want to feel so secure and safe and nurtured. And we also need to satisfy our sun, right? We need to feel we have some authority in our relationship, that we're being heard, that we're being listened to. I mean, that's a little bit of the ego, but we need both parts. But for all committed relationships, the real story is in the 7th house. Now, committed relationships, and I want to be clear about this, even though, as I talk about there are other houses that speak to specific relationships. But at the end of the day, your relationship with your mother, well, maybe that is a 4th house relationship. It's also a one-to-one relationship. So that's why any close relationship, any relationship that you can look at and say is a one-to-one relationship, yeah, you might look at the 3rd house for siblings, but look at that 7th house as well. And those committed relationships, so I've been calling it 7th house. Sometimes I do slip and I'll say marriage, but, back in the day, it was marriage. Times have changed. And so I started calling it committed relationships years ago because the truth of the matter is that at that time, right, if you were gay, you couldn't get married. Just because it was the law. And you have people who are married to each other and really are not committed to each other. And you have people who aren't married and are deeply committed. So that's why I prefer to use committed relationships rather than marriage. But whatever the type of relationship, let me just say this, that you want to analyze. So there are a couple of different ways to analyze it. But it always starts with the natal chart. It starts with you, okay? So some souls come here. Well, I think we all come here to learn about relationships, all right? Some of us are majoring in it. Some of us are taking, a remedial course in it. But to some degree, we all come here to learn about relationships. But whether it's a romantic relationship, a family relationship, it still starts with you. And so you look at the natal chart, and the first thing that you look at, if you're looking for your committed relationships, is you look at the ascendant. Because the ascendant is you, and then you look at the descendant, which is the other person. So when we talk about that 7th house, by the way, right, we say, oh, it's a mirror. And when you think about it in the natural zodiac, Libra rules the 7th house, Venus rules Libra. What's the glyph? It looks like a mirror. It reflects back to us. So on some level, we say, well, the partner I don't want to say it fulfills us, but it complements us. Or maybe there are things that we want, but we don't yet have. And that's an interesting point because the 7th house is also adversarial relationships and people that, we fight with or people that we resent or we compete with. And very often, especially competition, when you're competing with somebody, it's something that you want, and a lot of times you're competing with them because you feel like they've got it and you don't. So just a little point there. So if you're starting with it to analyze, you do start with the 1st house. That does include planets in the 1st house, by the way. And so you look at the ascendant, and basically you are going to analyze the chart ruler. Now, I know I did a show on the chart ruler, so I'm not going to go into anything really deep here, but basically, hey, you've got Libra rising, Venus rules Libra, okay, it's your ascendant ruler, your chart ruler. You're going to start with that. You're going to analyze the sign, of course, Libra on the ascendant, the approach to life, but you're also going to look for Venus in the chart. You're going to look at its condition. Does it have a lot of aspects? Is it unaspected? What house is it in? Is it retrograde? Is it intercepted? Okay. And of course, you're going to look at all of the aspects, and all of that's going to tell, right, the story about you. But it's your approach to life, and that includes, approach to life includes everything, including all types of relationships. And if we're talking especially about Venus, which happens to be a social planet, it's your approach. Are you a more outgoing person? Are you a person who really, maybe you just, you love to be out in groups and have, be a group person, right? A joiner, so to speak. And then again, maybe you're someone who really likes to spend time with yourself, but it will still tell you something about your relationships. And so when you're looking at the chart, and you are going to do the same thing, I'm going to say to you for the 7th house as well. But we're going to go around the wheel just kind of quickly here. Because, well, the first house, like I say, that's your approach. The second house, I always say it's your relationship with money. And that is true. But the second house, it's also your self-esteem, right? How much you value yourself. So in that sense, the second house does reflect your relationship with yourself. It can give you a lot of insight into how you view yourself. And so again, with any house that you're interpreting, okay, you are going to interpret that sign that's on the house, its ruling planet, with that whole laundry list I gave you before. And now the sun and the moon will never be retrograde, but you're going to look at the house. You're going to look at the sign. Then you are going to look at the ruling planet. What house is it in? What sign is it in? Is it retrograde? Is it intercepted? Is it unaspected? Does it have, like a dozen aspects? And what are those aspects? Are they all squares? Are they all trines? If you lack oppositions in general, I'll just say this, in general, if you look at the chart and you lack oppositions, that's a relationship lesson. Because without oppositions, relating to other people is something that does not always come that naturally. It's something that has to be learned. But I kind of digress there a moment. So as far as the other relationships, though, in the charts, like I say, the second house is really very much shows insight into your relationship with yourself. Now, the third house, side-by-side relationships. And those are your siblings, if you have any. It's your neighbors. It's your cousins. It's also agents, people who can represent you, sometimes like agents, and sometimes that's 7th house, but people who negotiate for you very often are in the 3rd house. Also teachers from grades kindergarten to 12. Now, you may not be interested in analyzing your relationships with teachers from the past, but then again, you might look back, especially if school was tough for you, grade school, and you had issues with teachers, you might find something interesting there. I will also tell you, though, that, listen, teachers are authority figures, so you would want to look at the 10th house as well. Get there in a couple of minutes. In terms of siblings, the 3rd house speaks to all of your siblings in general. The planet that rules it speaks to your oldest sibling in particular, if you have more than one. So if you have 2 siblings, the planet that rules your 3rd house represents your oldest sibling. The planet that rules your 5th house is the next sibling. When it comes to siblings, when it comes to partners, when it comes to children, there is this every other house in terms of counting how many children there are. So again, 3rd house, siblings in general, in particular, your oldest sibling. You want to see your next sibling. Let's say you've got 3, then you'd look at the planet for the 5th house. For the 3rd, you would go to the 7th. Now, the 4th house represents your relationship with your family in general, and specifically the nurturing parent. This has always been, in the past, it's been mom. Traditionally, it doesn't always work out that way. I mean, it really does depend. And to this day, if I see 4th and 10th houses, is it mom or is it dad? The rest of the chart will usually show me. Because if I'm looking at it and saying, is it mom? Let's say it's a troublesome relationship or a troubled 4th house. Well, if it's mom, I'm going to see those aspects to the moon. If dad's involved, I'm going to see some connection to Saturn. Okay, so I am being a little general there, but I'm just going to say that's usually how it does work out. And planets in these houses are crucial. And again, 3rd house, you would, of course, analyze any planets there as well. But in the 4th house, in terms of relationships, because I will tell you, when it comes to souls that have come here to learn about relationships, it's usually romantic relationships or it's family relationships. And I'm going to be frank with you, I actually think over the years, while I've seen so many romantic, I think it's sort of like neck and neck. So that 4th house, I say the planets are crucial. There's a big difference between seeing Jupiter in the 4th house and Saturn in the 4th house. The Jupiter more than likely, There was some support. Saturn could have been a strict parent, could have been financially. Things could be very, very tough. Uranus, an absent parent or some type of chaos. Neptune, again, unavailable or somebody ill. And if that's the first thing you look at, let's say, right? Now, does Uranus in the fourth house in and of itself mean that there was this chaos? Or Neptune, for example, that a parent was ill? The rest of the chart is going to tell you. And that's the truth. Especially, you will look at the moon. You're going to look at the ruler of the fourth house, okay, and the aspects to it, but you're also going to look at the moon. So the rest of the answer will come. That's why I keep saying the rest of the answer comes from the chart. Those planets in the house gives you the lead, so to speak. It's that heads up, like, hey, there's a problem here. And so for the fourth house, always look at the moon, but you are going to look at the sign on the fourth house. And again, you're going to interpret that planetary ruler. Now, the fifth house. So the fifth house, it is romance, okay? It's the people you date. It's Mr. or Ms. right now. They may make it to the seventh house and become a committed relationship, or, you may ghost them and they may just go by the wayside. Now, it's also children. Now, fifth house is children in general. Specifically, we do say it is your biological children. As for adopted children, I have seen them show up in the fifth house. I've also seen them in the 11th house, but I don't feel it's a hard and fast that it's only biological children in the fifth house, because a lot of times you may see a strong influence connected to children, a strong fifth house, and they're teachers. They don't have any children of their own, but they treat those children, right? They're so involved with children. So that's why the children you have to watch a little bit. And let's see what else about, so children. If we're talking about your own children, again, that sign on the fifth house, the planet that rules it, speaks to all of your children in general, in particular, your oldest. You have a second child, you're going to look at the seventh house, a third child, the ninth, every other house. Sixth house is your relationship. So aunts and uncles. And, specifically, they will say it's maternal aunts and uncles. And that's if you're saying that the fourth house is definitely your mother, okay? And your paternal aunts and uncles would be the 12th house. But I'm just going to say, from my experience, I find when matters come up with aunts and uncles, whether they're mom's side or dad's side, I do find they show up in the sixth house. If there's issues with them, it's a sixth house matter. At least that's how it works for me. It's also your relationship with your pets, your coworkers, okay, the people that you work with. If you have a lot of issues at work with people that you work with, or people who work for you, your secretary, your assistant, okay, the person who cleans your house, look at your sixth house. Look at that sign. Look at that planet. Look at the planets in it. And that will tell the story about it, as well as what the issue is. And when I say what the issue is, because it does show, because there's different ways we can have problems with coworkers. And here I'm just going to say, we could have coworkers, it seems like, God, we're always sabotaged, right? We're always sabotaged, or they dump their work on us. They don't respect us. And, are they dishonest? Do they gossip? Believe it or not, these things, you can actually get that fine a detail, really from the horoscope. So the seventh house, committed relationships, right? Spouses, spousal type unions, also your business partners, your best friends, not the casual people, okay, not your coworkers. I mean, they can be, you can have a coworker who's also a best friend, you see, and that's my point about those committed relationships. But looking at your closest friends, their relationships, you know what? Seventh house, they're relationships that you're invested in. And I think that's a good way really to look at it. Now, it is also relationships. It does include grandparents. And I'm going to say traditionally it's your maternal grandmother and your paternal grandfather. Okay? And, then if you look at that, the first house would be your relationship with your paternal grandmother and your maternal grandfather. And this is called derived houses, or the derived house system. I'm not going to get too much into it. I don't want to confuse people. But I have to tell you, if you're not familiar with the derived house system, and you do have a good grasp of the horoscope, look into it. Absolutely look into it, because it is very, very helpful. in analyzing relationships with people, but also can be very helpful in predictive astrology. So let's get back, though, to that seventh house. So seventh house is also people that you consult, and that can be lawyers. It can be doctors. Now, doctors also fall in the sixth house, okay, because it's, the medicine, but very often it's people that you consult. Seventh house also, if you're in a client business, seventh house is your clients, okay? Those are your clients. And so it rules, that relationship. And of course, those relationships with your competitors and your adversaries. Because remember, the seventh house, what I say traditionally, right, is the house of marriage. Yeah, it's also the house of divorce, right? This is where people sue us. So that's why I say your adversaries. And let's see. So seventh house, let's talk about some more relationships in general. So the eighth house. Now, the eighth house, it is also a money house. So we can say that is a relationship with money to some degree. Excuse me. Second house is more about relationship with money. How do you save it? Do you spend it? Eighth house is a little different. But to me, when I really look at the eighth house relationship, to me, it is your intimate relationships. Now, intimate relationships, I do mean, sexually or physically intimate relationships, but it's also about trust. It's any relationship where you're invested on a deeper level. Again, your finances are merged. It can be on a spiritual level. But I want to use the word trust because let's put it this way. Maybe there isn't trust, but there should be trust. Relationships where you really trust is a very big part of it. And I know that would be true for the seventh house, but it's a little bit different here on the eighth house. And it usually does speak a little bit more to the relationships that we are. Again, it's a different level of intimacy, a deeper level of intimacy. Now, the ninth house. So ninth house, that represents, it represents your relationship with grandchildren, if you have any. And here I'm also going to say it could be lawyers or judges because it's the ninth house. People who are foreign from different lands, different cultures. Also clergy, okay? Relationships with clergy, with spiritual leaders, with coaches, with mentors, with teachers, okay? Teachers of higher education. And it is actually a relationship with, I'm going to say, religion in general, as well as, it is a house of philosophy, so I can say religion/philosophy. But we don't always think of having a relationship with religion, but we do. Sometimes that relationship is that we don't have a relationship with religion. Excuse me. Sip of water time. Okay, so, but that's very much about the ninth house. It's also a relationship with your in-laws, brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, or sisters-in-law, I guess, is that it? And so with the third house, according to Derived Houses, which I know I said I wasn't going to get into that, but hey. So the 10th house. Now the 10th house represents your relationship. Here's where we say the authoritative parent, the dominant parent. And again, like I say to you, it can go, either way. But it is your relationship with authority figures. That's your boss. Can also be the government. Teachers. Could be the police. It's interesting. Military and police, just want to go there for a moment. Civil servants are sixth house. So you could put relationships with, I would say firefighters or, in generally speaking, in the sixth house in the military. But the bottom line to me is that it's about, are they an authority figure? Because if they are also an authority figure, that's like I say, a teacher, you may want to look at the 10th house as well. And so if you have a problem at work, you've had problems, you got a history of, the bosses from hell, look at your 10th house because that story is in the 10th house and it will tell you what the issue is. And listen, it may very well be the issue is the boss, but the issue it usually has something to do with you because there's probably a lesson here that you're learning, and it may be what's the issue with the bosses? They don't get me, they don't appreciate me, or maybe they feel I'm insubordinate, and so things along that line. Now the 11th house. So the 11th house represents, we say, it's friends. Okay, these are not your best friends. These are not the people you confide in. These are your casual friends, okay? Different levels of friends, right? Put them in different boxes, different circles. Okay, these are your casual friends. They're acquaintances. They're people that you speak to here and there. They're also your colleagues, and that's why we say your peers, but they're colleagues. You belong to a group, an association. You go there once a month. You chit-chat. They're nice. These are your 11th house friends. 11th house is also stepchildren. Now, by stepchildren, I want to clarify something. Yes, they are stepchildren. Say you've got a partner. They have children. They're your stepchildren. They're also what I call children of the heart. They may not be a partner's child. They may be a friend's child, maybe a student, might be, might be trying to think of another example. Could even be a niece or a nephew. Yes, they are related to you, okay? Which, by the way, nieces, God, right, where are nieces and nephews? Nieces and nephews come in the seventh house, okay? It's your children, it's your siblings' children. So just while I'm thinking of that, but it's a child of your heart. Now, let me see. Oh, the 12th house. So 12th house is interesting because with the 12th house, so I said it represents your relationship with supposedly paternal aunts and uncles. Also, we say large animals. It's also your relationship with spirit. It's your relationship with divinity. And I am going to say to some degree is also your relationship with yourself. And the reason I'm saying that is because the 12th house, it is the house of solitude. So it's like when you're alone, because some people don't like to be alone. Some people when they're alone have issues. And it's just sometimes there's an issue, like I said, that relationship with, that's with yourself. Now, 12th house is also past lives. So looking at the 12th house, you could look at it as a relationship, with past lives. So the other thing I want to mention is that, again, if the chart lacks oppositions, there can be a lack of awareness. All right. So it doesn't always, relating to others don't always come, naturally. It needs to be learned. I don't see that often. If the lunar nodes are in the signs of Aries and Libra, or they fall across houses 1 and 7, the soul is definitely here to learn about relationships. Usually there's boundary issues. You look to the rest of the chart for confirmation. If it's going to be a romantic issue, Venus may be retrograde or in the 12th house or a square Chiron, just as off the top of my head. If the North Node is in Cancer, or Capricorn, I should say, or fall across the 4th and 10th houses, parental relationships, family relationships. Again, you look to the rest of the chart for confirmation. With family, the planets tend to be more in the 4th house. I can honestly say I really can't think over the years of anything where I say, oh yes, I see planets in the 10th house and the soul came here to learn about family. Believe me, they're anchored in the 4th house. Now, let me see what else I wanted to talk about in terms of the relationships. All right, I'm going to leave it there in terms of the general. But so it starts with you and it starts with your chart, and you analyze your chart and you can analyze, the specific relationships. But then there's a relationship astrology of, hey, how do we get along, right? You and I. So we talk about synastry. And that's very commonly known as chart comparison, right? But really, when we talk about chart comparison, it is the synastry, okay, it includes the cross aspects, it includes the chart overlay, and it includes affinities, all right? That's what synastry, to me, really, I think of it, includes. So what are those 3 things? Well, the cross aspects, I think that's the most common. And it shows how we interact, and it also shows our attraction or our friction. And that's the type of thing like, olive oil's Venus is conjunct Popeye's Saturn. Okay? There's an idea of the cross aspect. Or Homer Simpson's moon is conjunct Morris Simpson's sun. Okay? I actually think that's true. I actually think I read that somewhere. I saw their charts or something. Maybe I read an article, but I read something somewhere. So when you're talking about the cross aspects, well, the trines and the sextiles between the charts, they do promote harmony and understanding. The conjunctions, it depends. They can be challenging. They can be inspiring. It's going to depend on the planets that are involved. Oppositions go either way. They can be really helpful because they can be complementary. They can create attraction. They can also promote competition. Now, the one thing I am going to say is if you see these, when you're looking at synastry, and you're looking at the cross aspects. And if you see all this great flow, especially between Venus and Mars, and there's so much flow, and you can think, wow, these two people, this would be a great match. And I'm going to tell you, you can introduce them, they'll probably get along great. But if we're talking about a romantic relationship, if you do not have squares, if you do not have some hard energy, some conjunctions, but really some squares, it's probably not going to go anywhere. You do need that friction. The friction creates, and I saw this firsthand in many times. And honestly, going back, years ago, I had a friend and I knew somebody else, and I looked at their chart and I thought, oh my God, I've got to introduce them. And I did, and they got along great. But again, nothing romantic. There were no sparks. And I remember, that's when I say my early years of astrology, I remember thinking, oh, how could this be? And then you learn. And that's why I say you need that friction. And so when you are looking, again, I'm just going to say to you at the synastry, the quincunxes, that's what I want to mention. So quincunx, when you have a quincunx between two charts, sometimes, now quincunx says we need adjustment. There's something uncomfortable. We need compromise. But sometimes it will identify where there is a potential issue that can be unresolved. In other words, where the couple, they may just have to, or the friends as the case may be, it might be an area where you just need to disagree. Okay, might be able to make the adjustment, might be able to make the compromise, but sometimes it does resolve what is really an unresolved issue. It is a minor aspect. That's the good part. But still, it's something to keep in mind. Now, the chart overlay. So the chart overlay, that describes how one individual experiences the other. It shows where one person has, let's say, where the influence they have. So here's what the chart overlay is. We take my chart, and there's my chart with Gemini rising, and then we take your chart. And basically, it's kind of like we dump all of your planets in my chart. That's the double wheel that you see. You're the inside wheel, they're the outside wheel. But to me, it's kind of like you pour the planets into the other person's chart. And where those planets fall, every single one of them is going to tell you something about, again, how they influence you. So I'm just going to give you an example. Is that, let's see. So if Jupiter falls in your first house, if another person's Jupiter falls in your first house, on some level they make you feel like $1 million. If their Uranus falls in your first house, you don't know where you stand with them. They're fun. You're probably attracted to them. You have a good time. You laugh a lot. But there's some sense of, let's say, instability. If a person's, let's say their Sun and their Venus falls in your 7th house, you probably see them as a natural partner, a natural friend. You're attracted to them. Their Sun falls in the 5th house. Again, they're fun. You perceive them as fun. If it's Saturn that's in there, okay, could be a little bit, it may not be the most lighthearted relationship. It does not mean that it's a bad relationship. In fact, it may be a very enduring relationship, but it's not going to be the same as having the sun or Jupiter there. So again, that's where the influence happens to be. And again, I'm just going to say, let's say someone's Pluto is conjunct your midheaven. They can be very influential in your career. I mean, you may have to watch it that they don't try to control it too much, because that is an issue sometimes with Pluto. Remember, Pluto's about power. But on a professional level, it could be someone who, again, will, can actually promote you, or I guess I could say control you. But it's going to depend also on the aspects, the cross aspects between the chart. But just to explain what the overlay means. And then there are affinities. And I think that affinities tend to be the most overlooked element or aspect of relationship astrology. And so let me explain what an affinity is. So an affinity is something basically, right? We have an affinity. We share it. We have it in common. And so here's the example I want to say to you of an affinity. And let's say, well, here's a good affinity. My Sun is, I'm going to use my own chart because, hey, I'm the only one here right now, right? So my Sun is in Capricorn. Okay, my Sun is in Capricorn. And my dear friend Rhonda, I've been friends with her since we're 12 or 13. Her Sun is in the 10th house. Now, in the natural horoscope, Capricorn rules the 10th house, right? Now, she's a Pisces, but her sun is in the 10th house. So my being a Capricorn, her sun being in the 10th house, that gives us an affinity. Okay? And let's see, I just want to give some, I actually think that's a really good, clear one. And so, but a different type of, I'm just going to say affinity, for example. Let's see. Captain Kirk is an Aries, okay? Captain Kirk is an Aries. And the easily agitated Dr. McCoy, let's say, has Mars conjunct his sun. All right? Mars rules Aries, right? Kirk is an Aries. Mars conjuncts McCoy's sun. I'm just making that part up, though. Come on, Kirk had to be an Aries. And let's say Jack and Jill. Jack has a Mars-Uranus conjunction, which can actually be kind of accident prone. And the equally clumsy Jill has a Mars-Uranus square. They have that affinity between them, okay? So it's just, that's type of affinity. Another type of affinity would be, let's see. I just want to think of, here. Okay. Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. Mickey Mouse is a Scorpio, let's say, and Minnie Mouse, let's pretend she has a stellium in her 8th house. 8th house in the natural zodiac is a Scorpio house. Let's say Minnie has 3 planets there. Let's say she's got, I don't know, Mercury, Venus, and Mars in Scorpio. That will give them an affinity. Okay? So I'm hoping that that's actually kind of a little bit, that's clear. I want to think if there's any others. I just think that's an idea. That's just a good example without getting too crazy. So when you're talking about relationships, and that's why I say you start with your chart. You can analyze any particular type of relationship by looking at your own chart. Then when you're with someone, you have a person, you say, well, I want to see our relationship together. Sure, look at the cross aspects and you look at the overlay. And like I say, but look for those affinities. And the reason why I stress the affinities is, and for those of you, and I know a lot of you out there are either practicing, or believe me, you're good enough to practice. You should be. You just don't have the confidence yet, I guess, is that you look sometimes and you say, why are these people together? And you look in the chart and you expect to see it and you don't really see it. You look at the cross aspects, you might look at the overlay, and it comes out in the affinities. Okay, so that's why I say, look, the answer sometimes is in the affinities. Now, in terms of compatibility also, or I should say relationship astrology, and again, for all relationships, the other thing is composite charts. Now, there are, stepping it up a little bit, okay, but there are different types of composite charts. I use the midpoint. Okay, I do use the midpoint chart. There's also the Davison chart, and Ronald C. Davison, and it's a time-space chart. Now, that's also a midpoint chart. It's calculated by combining the date, time, and place of each individual, and you find the midpoint for the date, that time, and that, let's say, and the locations. Now, as I said, I use the midpoint composite chart, and that's calculated by determining the midpoints between the planetary pairs in the horoscope. In other words, what's the midpoint between my sun and your sun, my moon and your moon? And so you get the drift, right? And so you can also, it's interesting because when you calculate them, and if you do this, if you have a horoscope, an astrology program, usually you have a choice. You have a choice of calculating it, the midpoint, setting the chart, calculate the 2 ascendants, or calculate the 2 midheavens. And you can try it both ways. Sometimes you get the same result. Sometimes you get a different chart. I use the midheaven because the midheaven represents to me the purpose and the destiny. And so I'm just going to say I use a midpoint composite chart. I calculate it, or I should say my Kepler program calculates it using the midheaven. Now, the composite chart is wonderful for close relationships. You're going to live with someone, you want to look at a composite chart. You're going to go into business with somebody, you want to look at the composite chart. And the thing about it, and you can actually usually use it for 2 people, but you can do it for multi partners. But what I love about, honestly, the chart is you can use it for forecasting. You can progress it. You can apply transits. You can do solar returns. And so if you're working with a couple, and sometimes I do, and something's coming up in someone's chart, let's say let's say it looks like a home move or something. And, it usually shows up in the other party's chart as well. But if you want the rest of the story, if it's not showing up as strongly there, you can look in the composite chart. The composite chart will also show you issues where sometimes, again, you look at a chart, look at the cross aspects, and you say, God, the communication between these people, it looks terrible. It looks like do they understand? Do they hear each other? Let's say there's some Mercury, Neptune going on there that's tough. And then you look at the composite chart, and you see that Mercury, you've got a beautiful angle of flowing communication in that composite chart when they're together between Mercury and Pluto or Mercury and Saturn. And so it sort of offsets it. And you say, that's where it is. Okay, maybe when they were first dating, it'd be interesting to ask them that. If the communication got better, the closer that the more depth to their relationship. Because that composite chart really shows how you behave with the person. We say it's like a new relationship, and it is. It represents the relationship. And the truth is, listen, we behave how we behave, but when we are with a partner, very often we do behave a little differently. I mean, some people behave radically differently, and we wonder, if they're drinking Kool-Aid or something. But other times, honestly, there's just a difference because you are in a relationship. Now, I have to say, if someone is getting married or someone's going to live with someone, I do recommend the midpoint, not to look and say, oh, this is terrible, or this isn't going to work out, because there's free will. You can be in the most miserable relationship ever, and you may choose to stick with it. And you want to know something? In this lifetime, maybe you are supposed to stay there a while because you're supposed to learn something to get something right. But the point about the relationship, and to me the real value of it, okay, because it's this tremendous insight into close relationships. And family relationships as well. You want to see dynamics. You have it, like I say, look at the relationship, with your mother. And it doesn't, I'm talking about like the trouble spots. Listen, they can show, you can have a wonderful relationship with mom, and it's going to show as well. It's just, to me, when I look at astrology, a lot of times we do look at it to help us sort of resolve our issues, spot our issues. And to me, it's one of the most helpful things, is to awaken us, to give us this insight, shed light on things. If you're going into business with someone, you really want to pay attention to those houses, okay, that are connected to money, to the 2nd and the 8th, as well as the planets in them, the planets that rule them. You want to pay attention and analyze communications, right, in that chart. Because if you're going to be in business together, you better have good communication. You also want to look at the values. Is there an issue? And interesting, because the 2nd house is income, but it's also values. It's something to look at. Because again, it may flow pretty well between the 2 charts, but you do want to look at it in the composite chart. Now, when there's a conflict, let's say it works well in the cross aspects or the overlay, and you see, oh, it looks like a red flag here on the composite chart. Does it mean, oh my God, let's ditch it? No. It's just be aware of it. It says that when you really get close, when you're really working together, something may come up that, maybe you didn't foresee. So maybe it's time to think about everything and just discuss it a little bit more deeply. And so you do want to look family relationships, and especially if you're going to, and family dynamics, of course, the moon is security needs, communication. Mercury and the moon, no matter what relationship it is, are really important, because Mercury is about communication and the moon is about, hey, security. And if we don't feel secure, if we do not feel safe, if we do not feel nurtured, we're going to have a problem. Romantically, and this is something I always say, Venus and Mars, right? And this is even the cross aspects. Venus and Mars will get you into the bedroom. But it's the moon that decides, hey, do you get along in the rest of the house? So also you want to look at other key things for personal relationship. Anger, okay? You're going to look at that individually. Look at how you deal with anger. The other person deals with anger, because you're going to look at their chart as well. You look at the cross aspects and you look at the overlay. But that composite chart, if you are going to be living together, you want to see, how is anger expressed in the relationship? And so if Mars is trining, Mercury, for example, like that's a wonderful thing. And it just says that you can speak directly. The signs are going to matter too, but there's a flow there. You get your point across. If you've got a Mars-Uranus energy going on, you might get pissed off very easily. They could be, big fights. And it could be, look, you get mad, you get over it. But it's going to depend on the rest of the chart. And you throw Pluto in there, and I'm not going to say that means you're getting a restraining order. But seriously, you've got to pay attention to these things. And sometimes when you look at that chart and you see these things, if nothing else, it gives you, hopefully, it gives you pause for thought. It makes you think. One last thing, just before I wrap this one up for this week, is when you're looking at a relationship, and sometimes people will, they'll come for an analysis of relationships, but significant relationships in our life. And when I say significant, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there. Significant for better, the love of your life, okay? The best business partner in the world, the best friend, or significant for worse. It can be somebody, and again, that turns out to, let's just say, it's an unfortunate situation. Usually when you look at that composite chart, yes, it shows there. The relationships, though, that are going to be enduring, okay, you will find a lot of conjunctions. And I'm also going to say significant, even if it is not, like I say, it may not turn out the happy ending type of relationship is what I mean, but they're significant. And so it's something interesting. If you look at the composite charts of, let's say your best friends or some of the relationships that you have had, by all means, think about that. Because you'll probably see a number of conjunctions. And when I say a number of conjunctions, you may have a stellium. You might have, 3 planets conjunct in whatever house it is. And because I know if I look at my close relationships, my closest friendships, that's what I have. I can look at, past relationships. You may even see certain themes, quite honestly, and patterns. But generally speaking, if, you meet somebody and you could be thinking about a business partnership or whatever, if you do a composite chart and the planets are like splayed out all over the place, I'm not saying, absolutely never, because nothing is impossible. But generally speaking, I'm not going to even say, from my own experience, I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any that have gone the distance that did not have a number of conjunctions. So I don't mean just like, the sun and Mercury are conjunct. That's kind of common. Yeah, the sun, Mercury might be conjunct. But so will, let's say, I don't know, Venus and Mars, or so will, Mercury and Pluto. You might have a series of duets in terms of the conjunctions, or more than likely, though, the planets, something else, the planets may be conjunct, and you may just look and see there are a couple of houses where it seems like all the planets are, the pattern. So just some things there that I want to throw out to you. And so as you can see, when it comes to really analyzing relationships, I mean, there's so much there, right? There's so much to it. It's so fascinating, but there's so much information that you can get. So that wraps it up for today. Again, excuse me, if you are interested in learning with me, and again, I will send you there. I do have a list of things that I do want to teach, but by all means, if I get a lot of emails and people are interested in one topic where I see, okay, then maybe I might move that one up in the list, and that's the one I'll do first. Relationships is just one of the things that's on the list, but I've got predictive work as well, and I know there's a very big interest in that, as well as some specific things about natal interpretation, interceptions. So many topics, so little time, but we'll get there. So again, thank you so much for joining me. And again, DebraClementAstrologer.com. By all means, please sign up for the newsletter. And until next time, may Jupiter's blessings be your constant companion.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. To schedule a consultation, please visit DebraClementAstrologer.com.